welcome back to the show. Today we are going to be talking about a Kickstarter project that is currently funding, and it's a uh, biography on Muhammad Ali. And uh, joining me is Ryan Alexander-Tanner, and he's the creator. So let's bring him in, find out more about him and about the project.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Going well. How are you?
Making do, making do.
Good, good. Yeah.
So before we get talking about your project, tell me a little bit about yourself, your history as a creator and a comic book reader in general.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading comics for 30, 35 years or something. So that's I feel like so much of my life has been reading comics, so I don't even know where to begin. Definitely like all genres of comics, I follow mainstream superhero comics and indie comics, I guess we call it. I think stylistically, I get more associated with indie, what we would call indie comics. Most of my work in comics has been nonfiction. Uh, I did a teacher ed book for Columbia University that's been out for about 15 years. We're actually doing a second edition right now. That's done really well. I do a lot of like messaging, like I'm doing environmental justice messaging right now as comics. So I'll work with an organization that'll say, like, oh, we need to get the Kellogg Dam removed and we need to do some outreach. And just this idea that, people, the public will engage with something more if it's illustrated, presented in a rather than a printout or an email or something. So a lot of my work has been getting messaging or information and repackaging it as comics. And I've done like backup stories for Savage Dragon and stuff like that too. Like I'm a little bit all over the map.
Okay, and do you remember maybe the first comic that you read, or maybe the one that made you want to, make your own?
Gosh, again, that's like my whole life story. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my oldest brother started bringing comics home. So probably right at the beginning of Jim Lee drawing X-Men with Chris Claremont. I think those are really early. Marvel Comics Presents when it first launched. I had the original Ninja Turtles, like those color reprints of the Eastman and Laird initial run. I remember those being really hot items. And then reading Calvin and Hobbes was a huge one too. My mom had Linda Berry books and Matt Groening books, Work as Hell. Those were in the house before I could even read. So those are like really deep in my consciousness. So, and I think for a long time, I thought I would be a comic strip guy, not a comic book guy. And I remember the Calvin and Hobbes 10th anniversary book coming out, reading Bill Watterson's commentary on everything. And it was all about like how much he hated the syndicate and what the syndicate was like and comic strips as an industry. And it sort of convinced me when I was in middle school not to pursue comics, which is too bad because maybe I could have done web comics or something. And then I don't know. I think I always think of that like what made you a lifer, what. And when I was a kid, I always say the launching of Image Comics was like the Beatles on Ed Sullivan moment. I was like 9 years old and the solicitation started coming out for Spawn and Wildcats. Todd McFarlane on Spider-Man when I was a kid was like the most incredible thing I had ever seen in my life. I thought he was literally the greatest artist who ever walked the earth. So when they started to go, these guys are going to have their own characters and their own stories, and the comics were like the first digital coloring and glossy paper. That was huge. And then as I was kind of becoming a teenager and my interests were shifting a little bit, I remember rereading like the first 20 issues of Spawn and being like, these comics are terrible. That kind of light bulb. But that was right when the Max was really picking up steam. Sam Keith and Bill Mesner-Loebs writing the dialogue. And that comic, I think, really made me a lifer. It kind of grabbed me right at the right moment of transitioning from these sort of like early Image superhero type narratives towards more mature theme stuff. It kind of really carried me. It was like this pivotal moment, and that series was such a big deal to me for such a long time. So I think I always credit that series as what got me hooked forever.
Yeah, cool. So let's talk about the Kickstarter that you're currently running. It's a biography of Cassius Clay, and Muhammad Ali.
Mhm.
What? Tell me about the book and kind of the inspirations behind it.
Yeah, well, I had the idea a long time ago of making a comics biography. I just think, again, like comics are a really good medium for telling these stories and telling a person's life story. And I loved the idea that a comics biography would have as much information as a written biography, bringing that standard of doing it with storytelling, really putting you in the moment and using concise language and things like that to describe events, but really getting into like, what is this about? Or just like an expansive thing. I think a big inspiration at the very beginning was I'm not going to remember his name. He did the Helen Keller comics biography. What's that guy's name? Joe something. He did Turtle Keep It Steady. Anyway,
Uh,
he did a really
I'm
great.
blanking too.
Okay, I'll try to look it up while we're talking. But he did a really good comics biography of Helen Keller. I loved the way he used comics, but it was such a small piece of her story, And I was like, if this was her whole story in this format, it would be such a great work. I mean, I still think it's a great work. So I got really interested in that idea. And then Muhammad Ali, to me, I think I didn't know a lot about him before I started the research process of sort of seeing if that's who I would want to talk about. But I knew that he refused to fight in the Vietnam War and that he essentially gave up everything to take that stand. And that to me, I think, was what I really knew about him that felt so important. So that was what got me. And then also that, when we're telling someone's life story through comics, it has to work well in comics. And boxing, I think, was such a appealing thing that someone does to recreate in comics. There was a Rumiko Takahashi did a manga series called 1 Pound Gospel about a boxer that I read as a kid, and I remember always going, "Why is there more boxing comics? It works so well in comics." So uh, that was in there too, and that was enough that I think I bought David Remnick's King of the World was the first one I read, and then the more I learned about him, the more I was like, this guy is the subject. I mean, a lot of this was that I spent a couple years just researching, and then a couple years just writing, and then a bunch of years drawing it. And Muhammad Ali has remained really compelling to me throughout. So, I mean, beyond this initial stand, him as a just as a public figure, the responsibilities he took as a public figure, the things he stood for, the time and place he lived in, and what impacted him, and the impact he had on larger culture. It's just fascinating to me.
So, tell me a little bit more about the research. How long did that been? How long did that take, and how was
Mhm.
it translating, that research onto the comic, onto the page?
Yeah, well, I think all this is about. If you look at my whole body of work, I have some kind of a brain that just is very satisfied by gathering information and then kind of organizing it into what ultimately becomes comics. So, yeah, I think I had a goal of like 50 pages a day. I would read 50 pages a day about Muhammad Ali, and I just read like a huge stack of biographies, and then some things would reference other things, and I would read articles. And so I got it it's in my basement, but I probably read, I don't know, 15 biographies or something. And they're kind of all the same. I mean, the larger story is the story of Muhammad Ali's life story is pretty established as a narrative. Um, and then there's a lot of books that are focused on a more specific thing, like, oh, this is about his early career, this is about his years in exile, this is about his relationship with Malcolm X. So there's a lot of books that really zeroed in on something, which were really helpful. So I spent about 2 years, while doing other stuff, making a living, but where I would, yeah, just dedicate some time in the day to this research process. And then it was like a lot of charts and lists and things, and documents. I remember I have a really huge document of quotes that I gathered, when there was important writing or just notes of kind of citing sources. So it kind of started as like a huge chart, and then figuring out I wanted this book to be like 150 pages, but his story is so expansive that it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So it's just too long. There too much happened, and it covers too many eras and things like that. So one thing I sort of arrived at that worked in comics was like the 12 issue maxi series, like Crisis
Hmm.
on Infinite Earths or something. I was like, okay, 12 chapters, and then what happens in each chapter? What are we figuring out? And that was something in the teacher ed book I did to teach. I really developed this process of taking this book and reading it and breaking it down into like bullet points or essential information. So then each chapter I got down to like an outline of like, here's what we're really trying to communicate in this chapter, and then it goes down to pages. Okay, on this many pages for this many pages for this, and it just became like a tighter and tighter outline. And then I drafted it like 3 or 4 times. So yeah, it's just like a lot of synthesizing of information, and then also visually, like what's visually interesting. How much time do I need to communicate this? By time, I guess I mean pages. So yeah, it's just like a lot of thinking about how to communicate this narrative and this information as comics.
Hmm. So, kind of getting into the, I don't want to say nitty gritty, but how do you, when you're, cartooning, how do you work? Do you work digitally? Do you work
Mm.
pen and paper, or is it kind of a hybrid type of thing?
Yeah, what I've really arrived at is I've been drawing the pencils in Procreate. So on an iPad with a
Hmm.
Apple Pencil. Which there's things I really don't like about that too. I would most like to, I think, if it was quicker to print things out and to scan things, I think I would go back and forth a lot more because you
Hmm.
can really get in the weeds, or you can spend a bunch of time drawing like something that's really tiny and then you zoom out and you can't even see it. Um, but that ability to scoot things around, like to move text around and to resize things, is so helpful. And perspective grids, are a really lovely tool. They're just so much easier to use than a ruler, especially if your vanishing point is far off the page. So anyway, yeah. So I do the pencils digitally, and then I print them, in blue on Bristol, and then I ink by hand with brushes mostly, and I hand letter everything, which is like real old fashioned at this point. And so it's sort of going back and forth, but that sensation of inking with a brush on paper, I can't get anything like that on an iPad, and I can't get the same lines, which a lot of people I seem to be able to just make that transition. But I think I'll never give that up. There's just something I like that the best out of the whole thing. I like inking on paper. So and then I scan it, and then like in this case, there's gray tones, so those are digital. And then cleaning it up and getting it formatted and stuff like that. So kind of and then the amount of reference for this project is insane. Like every page has a ton of reference. So I have all these image files of people's photos of people, and then even like, oh, they're in a casino in 1960. So what does that look like? And they're driving down this street in Miami in 1961. What is that? It's all real stuff. So I mean, the first chapter takes place in Louisville in 1954. I actually went to Louisville and went to the locations. And then I also, in the university, in like the basement of the library, there's these great archives. And I found all these photos of like the West End, the neighborhood Muhammad Ali grew up in, from that era, and they're like watermarked. They made me watermark them, but they let me take photos of the photos. So I've got a bunch of that stuff too. So very heavily researched.
Was there any, well, while you were researching, was there anything? interesting that you found out about his life, or anything that you found out, but where you weren't able to include in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it was interesting. And there's too much interesting stuff to include, I would say. A lot of that is making decisions about, and also just about how history works, like sometimes there'd be one incident and there'd be three different versions of it where you have to go, okay, what's true?
Hmm.
I like that too in an illustrated biography. The fact that it's illustrated to me is kind of communicating inherently that this is an interpretation of something, which I think frees you up a little bit from what is factually true. I say that everything that happens in the book is true, but it probably didn't happen that way.
Hmm.
And then there's these great moments. Like I got to sit with Bill Siegel a couple times, who made this documentary called The Trials of Muhammad Ali, which was all about his legal trouble about not fighting in the war, which that came out 10 years ago. But that was one of the things that really pushed me to do this project. He passed away and a few years ago, but I got to meet with him and talk with him a few times, which was a really great experience. And he told me this great anecdote that is not in the book, but Muhammad Ali, his whole life, he was like a practicing magician. He really liked to perform magic tricks, and he really liked to engage with audiences. He could took him 2 hours to walk 2 blocks because he would stop and talk to anyone who wanted to talk to him, and he'd do magic tricks for people. But because of his religious beliefs as a Muslim, he felt that it was wrong to deceive people. So he would always after he did the magic tricks, he would tell people how they were done. And he got kicked out of the Magicians Union because of that. I thought that was such a funny anecdote, and but I didn't put it in one because it takes too long to explain, and it's not really important. And also, it sort of felt like it was kind of cheapening like these actual stands he took. You know,
Hmm.
I'll give you some more that are more substantial. He went to Iraq right before Operation Desert Storm and sat down with Saddam Hussein and got him to release American hostages. I thought that was extremely important, and not enough people know that. There's this part of the narrative is that he got sick and then it's a tragic ending, but he had Parkinson's,
Hmm.
which part of this book too kind of advocates for that. I was really close with someone who had Parkinson's, and I knew him through the end of his life as he dealt with that. And through that experience, I was really bothered by the way it was written about, or the kind of common understanding of Parkinson's, in that people are fully cognizant who have Parkinson's. It's about the way your brain communicates to your muscles. It's not about how your brain works. And so, Muhammad Ali he had all his marbles. He was very aware of what was happening. And he was doing a lot of political work and like global ambassadorship or humanitarian efforts. He's going to Cuba and delivering medical supplies and things like that. So in, I think, 89 or 90, he went to Iraq and got Saddam Hussein to release American hostages, which is like an incredible thing he did that not enough people know about. So kind of celebrating him at the end of his life rather than pitching his later years as a sad story was really important to me. And then like his relationship with Malcolm X, I think it's surprising to me that that's not common knowledge. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm really like a Muhammad Ali nerd at this point. I can tell you all kinds of stuff.
Okay. So about the Kickstarter specifically,
Mm-hmm.
what are you? This isn't your first time writing a Kickstarter? It looks like. But what rewards are you offering? For people who want to back the project.
Yeah, so it's all written, the book, and it came in at like a little over 400 pages. So my plan was to break it up into two books. So, and the separation is when he changes his name. He was born as Cassius Clay. He was Cassius Clay for about 22 years, and then he's Muhammad Ali for the rest of his life. And it's kind of at a crucial moment for him. So the first volume is Cassius Clay when he's Cassius Clay, And I thought I would release it as two books. In talking with publishers, it turns out publishers don't want to release two books; they want one big book. And so, and I have a few publishers who are willing, who want to put the book out, but not until it's done. But that's another bunch of years of work. It's like another 250 pages to draw. So, the stretch goal, the lofty goal of this is that it'll kind of help me fund finishing the book. And then, I have a few choices of who to release it. And just to get what's done out. So the first volume's done. It's done. Uh, and it's $20. It's a mere $20. So that's, and then you can get a digital copy for $10, which is, I can't believe it's so inexpensive. And then, you can get a signed copy for a little more and a signed copy with a sketch. You can get a page of original art for $200. And then I'm going to add tiers soon of retail copies, 3 copies at a discount. And then I think a teacher deal of, because I really wanted this comic to be in classrooms. And so, and I've been involved in comics and education forever. And I've talked to a lot of teachers who have comics in their classroom are really interested in this book. So I thought having some classroom copies would be, kind of an ultimate goal, and I'll do like a discounted edition for that purpose.
So how has this campaign experience been in compared to the other ones that you've done?
Yeah, I can't even remember I think it's been a long time. I think I did a few Kickstarters when it was like a really new thing. So like
Hmm.
15 years ago. Um, I mean, it's been good. It's a whole experience, Kickstarter. So it made, half its goal in like 20 hours or something, and then it's like slowing down, and I'm now trying to do a push to doing a lot of radio and things like that. So it's a little nerve-wracking. Um, Sending out a lot of emails and things like that. I mean, it's a campaign, right? It's truly a campaign, so it feels that way. I'm not really worried about it making its goal. It seems like it's headed in that direction, but I'm getting concerned about it moving beyond its goal to kind of make more things happen. It's a hustle. I mean, I've been a professional artist for about 15 years, and so the hustle is not new to me. So it's a hustle.
Now you live in the Portland area, and that is
Mhm.
kind of a comic book, one of the up and coming hubs of where creators are.
Yeah.
How's that community, and are you how involved with it are you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm older now. I'm like 40. So I got 2 kids and I'm in my house a lot. I had my first baby at the right before the pandemic, or no, during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic. So I've been kind of inside for a long time. In my 20s, I was very active in the Portland comics community, and there's sort of facets. I've always been kind of nonfiction, more indie comics, I guess you would say. So,
Hmm.
like we have Helioscope Studios here, and I know some of those people, but I don't know a lot of those people too. And then there's people I've gotten to know really well. Matt Bors was a Portland guy who ran the Nib. He's a really close friend of mine. I'm doing a project with Mark Russell right now, who's a Portland creator. We got an announcement in like a week or something, so I can't quite talk more about it. But I got a series coming out with him later in the year that I'm really excited. And it's actually my first kind of step into what you might call a more mainstream type of comic. So I'm very excited about that, and keep an eye
Yeah,
out for that one.
I'll have to ask him where we're going to have Mark on back on our weekly show in a couple weeks. So
Oh, cool. Yeah, so it'll probably be public by then. It's a weird moment where I'm promoting this, but I can't quite say what that is. But I've been working on that all year. So but yeah, it's vibrant. I mean, I'm old enough now where like the young up and coming comics creators in my area I don't really know them. They're sort of peripheral, and I just don't have the time, like I don't get out that much anymore. So I
Yes.
used to go to like drink and draws and live readings and like who's the new people, and I just like an old married guy now. So I'll read comics all the time, forever. I love comics so much, but I'm less socially involved in that world at this time than I have been.
So, kind of following up on reading comics, what are you currently reading, if anything, that is really uh, you know meeting that you're really enjoying?
Yeah, well, I'm a Savage Dragon lifer. Like I said, I've done a few backup. There's actually 275 came out a couple days ago, and I have one page in the back of there I did with Joe Keating. That's another Portland comics guy I've known for some time. So I, it's in my hold box. I pretty much Cosmic Monkey Comics in Portland is a great, great store, and I go pick up the new Savage Dragon whenever it comes out. I'm trying to read more mainstream stuff like Batman Offworld. I just
Hmm.
read. I really liked that Batman and Robin Year One that Chris Samnee is drawing. Chris Samnee is a favorite of mine. Love Chris Samnee, man. He's so good. What else am I picking up? I'm trying to pick more stuff up because it's just like uh, just paying attention to what's going on. I look at the Fantagraphics solicitations always. I picked up Charles Burns' new book, Final Cut. I haven't read it yet. I'm actually doing a podcast. It's called The Runs, and we talk about runs of comic books that I do in seasons. So I'm recording season 3 right now, and then I record for like 6 months, and then I release them weekly when they're all done. So like I just had Keith Knight on. We're talking about Joe Matt's Peep Show. I had Mark Russell on in season 1. We talk about one of the chunks of the Sandman. Jack Kirby's Force World. For some reason, 70s Kirby comes up a lot on that
Hmm.
series. So yeah, so that's a lot of my reading. And then I don't know, I've been reading comics on my iPad before bed. I have the Marvel and DC apps.
Hmm.
And so like I just read Hickman's entire Avengers run, which I don't know how I felt about that, but it's good to read before bed. I feel very much that mainstream, Marvel and DC comics ask too much of you. Like I read Hickman's introduction to X-Men, those 2 miniseries he did, and it was like one of my favorite things I've read in forever. And then it just turns into like this huge buckshot of
Oh,
titles of various quality.
House of X, Power of X, X of X.
Yeah, and then it just turns. It's like you can't. I mean, I think it's really remarkable that I've been reading comics for 30 years and I can't even follow things anymore. I think that that's something we should pay attention to. The people who do the marketing. Like I read all of Immortal Hulk, which I loved, man, and it was like one thing. It was one title, consistent writer and artist. You got to fill an artist sometimes. That's okay, and it was like never turned into a big crossover. It never got interrupted by anything. And I would buy way more comics if there was more of that. I think that
Hmm.
I enjoy the occasional event, but I don't enjoy perpetual events. And uh, yeah, that's my old guy rant about comics.
Well, as we kind of wrap things up here, is there anything else about the Kickstarter that maybe we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure that people knew about?
Sure. I mean, I could go on and on about it. I just think if you're interested in comics biographies, if you're interested in the civil rights era or American history, if you're interested in speaking truth to power, I think the idea of opposing corrupt government is maybe important at this moment, if not always. And if you're just interested in learning about a subject, I really went into it with an open mind and open heart. I didn't go in saying, "Here's what I want you to know about Muhammad Ali." I went in with a curiosity, and I tried to share what I learned, and I didn't try to take it from my own stance necessarily. I tried to really look at the perspectives of the people within the story and represent them in a way that felt authentic to them rather than it's always through your lens as an artist, as a writer. But I really try to take that stance, and I hope it feels that way. And that just applying a standard of research, a really high standard of research to the work, I think is something I would like to see in all nonfiction comics, that I did the work. I think if you read it, you'll see I did the work, and
Right.
it should be evident in the material. Oh, and also, if you're curious about if you go to the Kickstarter, you're still not sold, you can email me. You can message me through the Kickstarter. You can email me through my website, ohyesverynice.com, and I'll send you a digital chapter, and you can scrutinize it.
So it looks like you have about 3 weeks to go. You're more than halfway to the goal of $5,000 needed to fund. Um,
Yep.
so best of luck in the next 3 weeks as you continue to um, have the daily anxiety as you look at the stats and
Yeah.
um, so is where what's your website or where are you on social media where people can find you?
Yeah, my website's ohyesverynice.com, ohyesverynice.com. My name is too long to be a handle, so I had to come up with something. Oh, yes, very nice is my Instagram. I'm doing a lot of Instagram stories about this and posting like blurbs I got some really good blurbs from writers and people in comics. I'm on Facebook. It seems like there's a real exodus happening from any Meta-owned social media, so
Yeah.
that's inconvenient for this moment that I'm campaigning. But yeah, those are and then yeah, you can look at my website. I don't think there's anything about the Kickstarter on my website, but yeah, just if you go to Kickstarter and just type Muhammad Ali, it'll come right up.
And if we'll definitely continue to follow it over on Comic Watch in our weekly crowdfunder corner roundup. And Yeah, would love to chat with you in the future when if you have any other projects that you're working on. After this one wraps up, are there any other uh, you know similar project biography uh, you know books like this that you'd like to do?
I'm kind of moving out of nonfiction a little bit, going a little more into genre. The thing I'm doing with Mark Russell is my first like genre comics work, and I'm really liking that. And then I have a pitch. I can't say where, but it's in phase two, so I might have a series announcement coming up, and that would be something more cartoony. I kind of have an eclectic approach, which has not been the most practical thing. It's just sort of me as a person. I have different interests at different times. So these biographies, I really like writing them, and then they're so hard to draw, like all these real people, and everything's real and true and based on research. So I might be moving out of nonfiction a little bit and more into more kind of genre comics. We'll see, but make sure you follow all my stuff and buy all my stuff, and you'll learn more as you go.
Oh, definitely. We'll continue to follow you and what you do, and it was great connecting with you and chatting with you, and look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thanks, and have a great day.
Yeah, you too.